The words hit me like a physical blow, delivered with the kind of calculated malice, only possible from someone who had been scripting this moment of public triumph for years. My ex-wife, Jacinda, left Dawn 7 lavish estates in Atlanta. Kenley's voice echoed through the high-end law offices like a winning siren. His perfectly tailored hands clutched the deed papers like championship trophies. Elias. Oh, what a shame. You only got the old oil field warehouse in Oklahoma. The immediate buzz of congratulations started. Cousins I barely recognized. Distant relations who'd tracked the obituaries the moment Jacinda's name hit the financial papers. Aunt Roberta, who'd borrowed startup capital from Jacinda for 30 years and never repaid a dime, all of them applauding like Kenley had just announced a multi-million-dollar IPO, which in their minds, he had. I sat in the leather armchair beside the massive mahogany conference table, my working man's hands folded in my lap, watching my former son-in-law perform his victory lap with the practiced ease of someone who'd plotted this scenario for years. At 35, Kenley operated in the world like a person who'd never encountered a closed door. His blonde hair was slicked back perfectly. His Italian suit probably cost more than a teacher's annual salary. 7 estates, he continued, holding up his phone to snap a celebratory selfie with the legal documents. Gated communities, infinity pools, integrated smart home systems. Can you even imagine the property value? More applause, more congratulations, more validation for the man who'd spent the last 4 years treating me like an inconvenient relative who'd shown up uninvited to every family event. The lawyer, Miss Henderson, cleared her throat diplomatically. Mr. Washington, if we could proceed with the remainder of the will reading. Oh yes, of course, Kenley said, not bothering to lower his voice or modulate his pure joy. I'm sorry, Elias. I didn't mean to be so elated about our inheritance. I know this must be difficult for you. Difficult? As if watching your ex-wife's family celebrate your apparent financial failure was merely an inconvenience rather than a carefully staged humiliation. I looked across the table at my daughter, Dawn, 40, sitting there like a statue carved from a combination of embarrassment and deference. Her dark hair, so much like her mother's, was pulled into a perfect, restrained bun. Her designer suit was tailored to hide the soft edges that came from a lifetime of never having to do anything physically taxing. She wouldn't meet my eyes, just stared at her folded hands while her husband performed his one-man show about inherited wealth. Dawn, I said quietly, my voice cutting through Kenley's continued self-congratulation. You're extremely quiet. She finally looked up, and I saw something in her expression that gave me a familiar ache in my chest. Not grief for her mother, not concern for my feelings, but shame. Shame that her father, the man who'd raised her, the scholarship kid from North Philly, had received what everyone in the room considered a pathetic consolation prize. Dad, she started, then trailed off, glancing nervously at Kenley as if needing his permission to speak. Dawn's just overwhelmed, Kenley answered for her, sliding back into his chair with the fluid confidence of someone who never doubted his right to command a room. 7 properties are a lot of square footage to manage. We'll probably need to hire a full-service portfolio management firm. Perhaps purchase a private jet to travel efficiently between them all. Aunt Roberta laughed loudly. Kenley, you better invite us to the housewarming parties, all 7 of them. Naturally, we're thinking of hosting the first one next month. A real celebration of Jacinda's legacy. He turned to me with a smile that was engineered to look empathetic, but felt entirely predatory. Elias, you're welcome to come, of course. I know the warehouse isn't much, but maybe you could turn it into something useful, like a salvage yard or a welding shop. You were always so. Hands-on. Hands-on? The phrase he used when he meant poor, when he meant beneath his notice, when he meant someone who built things with his hands instead of merely signing for them. I reached into my worn leather contractor's satchel and pulled out the envelope containing my inheritance documents, the deed to a 40,000 square foot warehouse in Cushing, Oklahoma. The building where Jacinda and I had spent countless weekends during our marriage, back when I was still trying to understand why she'd been so insistent about buying property in such a remote, unremarkable location. A warehouse, Cousin Martin said with poorly masked pity. Well, Elias, at least you'll have somewhere to store all your old tools. More forced laughter, more sympathetic glances from people who'd never offered genuine support when it might have been useful. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting after sitting through 2 hours of legal procedure and family performance. Everyone in the room fell silent, watching me with the kind of fascinated, almost morbid curiosity usually reserved for televised court cases. Miss, Henderson, I said, addressing the lawyer directly. Is there anything else I need to sign? No, Mr. Washington. Your inheritance is fully executed. The warehouse, the surrounding 40 acres, and all subsurface mineral rights are transferred to you, free and clear. Subsurface mineral rights. I noted that phrase sailed right over everyone's heads, including Kenley's. He was too busy mentally selecting the color palette for the pool deck of his newest Atlanta acquisition to pay attention to technical legalities. I tucked the documents back into my satchel, the same one I'd carried for 25 years, because it was robust and served its purpose perfectly. Unlike some things I'd learned, quality engineering lasted longer than temporary flash. Well, I said, looking around the room at faces flushed with second-hand excitement about Kenley's massive windfall. Congratulations to everyone. I truly hope you enjoy your good fortune. I walked toward the door, then paused with my hand on the polished brass handle. Dawn was looking at me now, finally, her expression a mixture of guilt and something that might have been genuine concern. Sweetheart, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent room. You really don't know, do you? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kenley's triumphant smile froze on his face, like ice forming on a window. Don't know what? He demanded, his voice higher pitched than usual. I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised and loved, and tried to prepare her for a world that was more complex than inherited wealth and Atlanta real estate. A world where appearances could be catastrophically deceiving, where the most valuable things weren't always the most obvious ones, where an abandoned Oklahoma warehouse might be worth infinitely more than 7 luxury estates in a desirable zip code. Don't know what, Dad? Dawn echoed, finally finding her own voice. I smiled, the first genuine expression I'd managed since Jacinda's funeral 3 weeks ago. Not a happy smile exactly, but the calm expression of a man who knew a profound secret that everyone else was about to learn the hard, expensive way. Nothing, sweetheart, nothing at all. I opened the door and walked out of the law office, leaving behind a room full of people who thought they knew exactly what Jacinda Monroe's final instructions had accomplished. Behind me, I could hear Kenley's voice rising in volume and pitch, demanding answers to questions he didn't even know how to properly formulate. Let them celebrate their Atlanta estates, I thought as I walked to my 17-year-old Ford F-150 work truck. Let them plan their jet-setting itineraries and their portfolio management companies and their Instagram posts about inherited luxury. Jacinda had always been smarter than any of them realized. And in 60 minutes, when I was safely back in my modest converted workshop loft, I would open the sealed letter she'd left for me, the one Miss Henderson had handed me along with the warehouse deed. The letter that would explain exactly why my ex-wife had chosen to give her grieving family exactly what they thought they wanted, while giving me exactly what I actually needed. Some inheritances, I was learning, were more meticulously planned than they appeared, and some warehouses in Oklahoma were worth more than 7 estates in Atlanta, Georgia. But that was a profound lesson for another day. Today, I just wanted to go home and read a dead woman's final words to the man who'd loved her long enough to understand that her greatest act of love might look like calculated abandonment to everyone else. The drive home from the lawyer's office passed in a blur of Atlanta traffic and churning analysis. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my Ford F-150, 17 years old, but meticulously maintained. Much like everything else in my life since the divorce, while Kenley's triumphant laughter echoed in my memory like static electricity. 7 estates in Atlanta. The words had been delivered with the kind of vindictive glee usually reserved for lottery winners, rubbing their fortune in the faces of people who'd bought losing tickets. I pulled into the parking lot of the old Fourth Ward flats, the modest 2-story loft complex I'd called home for the past 6 years. Not because I couldn't afford better, but because I'd learned to value substance over appearances, functional design over empty flash. The ground floor unit, converted from a storefront, had everything a practical man needed: concrete floors, exposed beams, and neighbors who minded their own business. Mr. Maney Jones from 2 Amperes was tinkering with his classic Mustang as I climbed out of my truck, and he waved with the casual friendliness of someone who knew me as the quiet contractor in the loft, who always paid his rent early and never complained about noise. "How was your day, Elias?" he called out, his voice carrying the genuine concern that comes from small kindnesses between neighbors. "Eventful," I replied, managing a tired smile. Jacinda's will was read today. Oh my, I hope everything was fair and square. If only he knew. as fair and square as a geometric equation designed to prove a point. Inside my loft, I dropped my satchel on the worn oak workbench and stood in the silence that had become my constant companion since the divorce. Not the oppressive silence of true loneliness, but the peaceful quiet of someone who'd finally learned the difference between being alone and being abandoned by expectation. The sealed envelope sat in my satchel like a ticking clock. Jacinda's precise, angular handwriting, spelling out my name in the script I'd known for 32 years. We'd met in college. Me, the scholarship kid from a rough North Philly neighborhood, studying civil engineering and infrastructure. Her, the business major, whose family owned a substantial portion of Atlanta's commercial real estate portfolio. I'd fallen in love with her ambition, her quick wit, and her complete lack of awareness about her own immense privilege. I'd married her despite her money, not because of it. The divorce had been civilized, even professional. 28 years of marriage, ending not in hatred or betrayal, but in the quiet recognition that we'd grown into people who loved each other, but whose fundamental life paths could no longer align. Jacinda had needed constant motion, high-stakes business deals, industry dinners with people who talked about quarterly profits over expensive champagne. I'd needed space to design, to build, to exist without performing the role of successful businesswoman's trophy husband. We'd remained professional friends after the papers were signed. Awkward at first, then gradually finding a comfortable, respectful distance that let us share coffee occasionally without the weight of failed expectations crushing the conversation. I made myself a cup of dark roast coffee, Jamaican Blue Mountain, the same brand I'd been drinking since graduate school, and settled into my drafting chair by the window. The Atlanta skyline glittered in the late afternoon light, a view I'd chosen specifically because it reminded me that cities were simply engineering projects, scaled-up complex problems, solved with concrete, steel, and rigorous planning. The envelope opened easily, revealing 3 pages of Jacinda's precise handwriting, and a smaller sealed envelope marked, "Open after reading letter." "My dearest Elias," it began, and I could hear her voice in every word. The slight, formal cadence she'd never quite shaken, despite decades of business school and corporate meetings. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've just put up with what I suspect was a rather unpleasant performance from our family, specifically from Kenley, who has been practicing his victory speech for months, completely unaware that he's celebrating winning a game he doesn't understand." I paused, a tired laugh escaping despite myself. Even dead, Jacinda could assess people with surgical precision. "Elias, I need you to know that everything I'm about to explain was planned with mathematical rigor, not as revenge. I'm not petty enough for that. Despite what you might think about my final distribution of assets, this is education. Brutal, expensive education that our daughter desperately needs if she's going to become a self-sufficient woman instead of remaining a trust fund, dependent with good intentions." I sipped my coffee and continued reading, feeling the familiar mixture of professional admiration and personal frustration that Jacinda had always inspired. She'd been the only person I'd ever known who could make questionable decisions seem like acts of absolute wisdom if you analyze them hard enough. "The Atlanta estates are beautiful, Elias. Absolutely stunning. Kenley has been driving by them for 2 years, taking real-time video, planning renovations he couldn't afford. What he doesn't know, what none of them know, is that I bought those properties with highly leveraged financing specifically to engineer this moment. My engineering mind immediately started calculating debt-to-value ratios, balloon mortgage payments, property taxes on 7 high-end luxury homes, the numbers that Dawn would discover when the celebration ended and cold reality set in. The warehouse, on the other hand, well, you remember the warehouse. You remember why I bought it? Even though at the time you thought I was being sentimental about a random oil patch town, I remembered. We'd been driving through Oklahoma, on our way to a construction trade show, when I'd noticed the geological formations around Cushing, the subterranean strata, the seismic mapping data that suggested something incredibly valuable beneath the surface. I'd mentioned it casually, the way successful developers notice things that other people overlook. And you, my brilliant ex-husband, had surprised me by actually listening. I know you, Elias. I know you're sitting there right now calculating mortgage payments and wondering how Dawn is going to afford 7 Atlanta estates on her current consulting income. The answer is, she can't. Those houses will bankrupt her within 6 months, unless she makes some very adult decisions very quickly. But you, my brilliant engineer, you're about to discover that your warehouse sits on something considerably more valuable than private swimming pools and luxury real estate. I set down the letter, my pulse quickening. Jacinda had always been excellent at surprises, but this felt different. This felt like the kind of surprise that changed everything, permanently. The smaller envelope contained a single key and an address I recognized, the law office of Patricia Hennings, the environmental and subsurface rights lawyer who specialized in natural resource extraction in the mid-continent. The same lawyer I'd met briefly at a professional development seminar 5 years ago, back when I was still consulting on large-scale infrastructure projects, and she was presenting a paper on natural gas rights in the Oklahoma shale. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Dawn's number appeared on the screen, and I considered letting it go to voicemail. But paternal instinct, even bruised paternal instinct, made me answer. Dad. Her voice sounded strained. Younger than her 40 years. Are you okay? I mean, after today, with the will reading and everything? I'm fine, sweetheart. How are you handling your inheritance? That's actually why I'm calling. Kenley wants to fly down to Atlanta tomorrow to look at the properties. Start planning immediate high-end renovations. Maybe hire a third interior designer. He's already contacting contractors about installing custom indoor waterfalls. Indoor waterfalls on properties that probably already had them, financed with debt that would swallow Dawn's savings like quicksand. That sounds ambitious. Dad, I know today was awkward. The way Kenley behaved, the things he said about your warehouse. He didn't mean to be cruel. Yes, he did. Kenley had meant every calculated word, every dismissive gesture, every moment of public humiliation. But Dawn wasn't ready to see that cold truth yet. Sweetheart, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you know how much it costs to maintain 7 luxury properties in Atlanta, Georgia? Silence on the other end of the line. Then, we'll figure it out. Mom left us the houses free and clear, right? No mortgages. Oh, my sweet naive girl. Did Miss Henderson mention anything about existing liens or specific financing structures? I don't. Kenley was handling most of the financial discussions. He's much better with that kind of strategic planning than I am. Kenley, who'd majored in communications, and whose primary idea of financial strategy involved maxing out credit cards on status symbol purchases. Kenley, who was about to discover that inheriting 7 estates wasn't the same thing as being able to afford them. Dawn, I want you to do something for me. Before you sign anything, before you make any major decisions about those properties, have an independent accountant review all the financial obligations. Promise me. Dad, why are you being so paranoid? Mom loved us. She wouldn't have left us something that would intentionally hurt us. I looked at Jacinda's letter, at her careful explanation of brutal education and necessary lessons, and realized that my ex-wife had understood our daughter better than Dawn understood herself. You're right, sweetheart. Your mother loved you very much, more than you know. After we hung up, I sat in my chair watching the sunset over Atlanta, thinking about Oklahoma warehouses and Georgia estates, about the difference between gifts and hard lessons, about the price of learning who you really are, when everything you thought you wanted turns out to cost more than you can sustain. Tomorrow, I would drive to Oklahoma and unlock whatever secrets Jacinda had left buried beneath 40 acres of shale rock. Tonight, I would mourn not just my ex-wife, but the comfortable innocence my daughter was about to lose when cold financial reality came calling on her Atlanta dreams. Some educations I was learning were more expensive than others, and some gifts were really just lessons wrapped in prettier paper. 18 months before Jacinda's death, the call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing blueprints for a municipal water reclamation facility in Jackson. My phone showed Jacinda's name, which was unusual. We typically communicated through text messages or brief, functional conversations about Dawn's birthday gifts or holiday schedules. Elias, do you have time to talk? Not over the phone. In person. Something in her voice made me set down my coffee and pay close attention. In the 6 years since our divorce, I'd heard Jacinda sound tired, frustrated, occasionally amused, but never this absolutely hollow. Of course. Is everything serious? I need to meet somewhere private, away from Atlanta, away from anywhere we might run into someone we know. She paused, and I heard city noise in the background. What about that small diner in Cushing, the one near the old warehouse? The warehouse. We'd driven past it a dozen times over the years. That massive abandoned concrete structure sitting on 40 acres of mid-continent farmland, like a monument to failed industrial ambition. Jacinda had bought it during our marriage. A whim I'd thought then, though I'd provided the initial geological survey that had convinced her the land had some vague long-term potential. The Prairie View Diner, Jacinda. That's 4 hours from Atlanta. I know. Can you meet me there Thursday at 2? I agreed, more out of a trained engineering curiosity than immediate concern. Jacinda had always been prone to drama, skilled at making simple conversations feel like international trade negotiations. But when I saw her 2 days later, sitting in a corner booth at the small-town diner, with her shoulders curved inward and her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, I realized this wasn't drama. This was something darker. This was profound fear. "You look terrible," I said, sliding into the booth across from her. Always the engineer. Straight to the point. She attempted a tired smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Elias, I'm sick." The words hung between us like a terminal diagnosis neither of us wanted to acknowledge. I studied her face, noting the subtle signs I'd missed during our occasional coffee meetings. The sudden weight loss, the profound fatigue around her eyes, the careful, deliberate way she moved, like someone conserving limited energy. How sick, pancreatic, aggressive. The doctors say I have maybe 2 years, probably less. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like it was the only anchor she had left. I've known for 6 months, been trying to figure out how to handle things. Dawn, Kenley. The mess I've made of my daughter's life by giving her everything, without ever forcing her to learn the true cost of anything. I leaned back against the worn vinyl booth, processing this immense information. Jacinda had always been a master planner, someone who thought 5 major moves ahead in every situation. If she was telling me about her diagnosis, it wasn't because she needed emotional support. It was because she needed something practical. "What do you want from me, Jacinda?" "I want you to help me save our daughter." She pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents, bank statements, property records, complex financial projections that made my engineering mind immediately start calculating leverage ratios and risk assessments. "Look at this," she said, spreading papers across the table between our coffee cups. "Really, look at it. The Atlanta property's 7 luxury estates purchased over the past 18 months, with financing that made my stomach tighten. Each house was beautiful, expensive, and leveraged to the absolute breaking point. The combined monthly carrying costs exceeded Dawn's annual income by a factor of 3. "Jacinda, what in God's name were you thinking?" "I was thinking about Kenley." Her voice carried a flat bitterness I'd rarely heard from her. "Have you been truly watching him lately, Elias?" "I had at family gatherings, holiday dinners, the few occasions when our post-divorce politeness had put us in the same room. Kenley moved through Dawn's life like someone playing a calculated role. The devoted husband, the loving son-in-law, the man who just happened to know the exact market value of every gift, every dinner, every gesture of affection. He doesn't love her," I said quietly. "He loves the Monroe name. He loves the prestige, the social status, the idea of inheriting wealth he didn't earn." Jacinda's hands were shaking slightly as she organized the documents. "I've been testing him, Elias. Subtle things at first, mentioning hypothetical financial setbacks, talking about scaling back the business, suggesting we might need to be more cautious with liquid assets. And he panics every time. He starts researching my assets online, asking Dawn pointed questions about inheritance timelines, making comments about how absolutely vital it is to protect the family legacy." She looked up at me with eyes that held more despair than her physical diagnosis could account for. "He's already planning my funeral, Elias. Not because he'll miss me, but because he's mathematically calculating what Dawn will inherit when I'm gone." I studied the financial documents, using numbers to process emotions that felt too immense and complicated for immediate words. The Atlanta estates were beautiful, glittering traps designed to appeal to Kenley's desire for luxury, while creating debt obligations that would destroy anyone who couldn't see past the opulent surface. "You bought these properties knowing they'd bankrupt Dawn." "I bought them, knowing they'd reveal Kenley's true priorities, and force Dawn to make hard, adult choices about the kind of woman she wants to be. Jacinda, that's..." I searched for the right word. "Ruthless." "No, Elias. Ruthless is allowing our daughter to remain married to a man who sees her as little more than a walking, talking trust fund. Ruthless is dying quietly and leaving her defenseless against someone who's been systematically isolating her from family and friends, while positioning himself to claim everything we built." She pulled out another set of documents, these ones bearing my signature from 28 years ago. Geological surveys, subsurface mineral rights assessments, water table analyses, all the technical work I'd done when Jacinda had insisted on buying 40 acres of apparently worthless Oklahoma farmland. You remember this? Of course I remember. You thought I was crazy for seeing untapped potential in that empty land. You weren't crazy, Elias. You were precisely right, as always. She spread out updated geological reports, environmental impact studies, major corporate contracts that made my breath catch in my throat. That warehouse sits on one of the richest, easily accessible natural gas deposits in the mid-continent shale. I've spent the last year negotiating mineral rights and gas extraction contracts with 3 major energy corporations. The numbers on the contracts were absolutely staggering. Millions in guaranteed annual royalties, with escalation clauses that would increase the payment substantially over time. Clean, reliable, renewable income that would continue for generations. Why are you showing me this? Because I'm going to leave the warehouse and the land to you. All of it. The land, the building, the subsurface mineral rights, the signed corporate contracts, everything. I stared at her across the small diner table, understanding finally and completely dawning. You want Kenley to think he won? You want him to celebrate inheriting 7 indebted estates while I get the warehouse that everyone will publicly view as utterly worthless? I want Dawn to learn the difference between true wealth and massive debt. Between appreciating actual assets and chasing unsustainable liabilities, between a husband who loves her and a man who only loves her money. Jacinda reached across the table and took my hand. And I want you to be there to professionally catch her when she falls. Elias, you're the only person who ever loved our family without wanting anything superficial in return. You're the only one who will help Dawn rebuild her life based on character and integrity instead of empty inheritance. Her grip tightened slightly. Will you do this? Will you let me give you the warehouse and everything that comes with it? I looked at the contracts, the geological reports, the undeniable evidence of Jacinda's elaborate, high-stakes plan to educate our daughter through controlled financial destruction. It was manipulative, overwhelmingly complex, and probably the most loving, sacrificial thing Jacinda had ever done as a mother. What if Dawn never forgives me for having what she desperately needed? Then she's not the woman I raised her to be. But Elias, if I know our daughter, and I do know her, underneath all of Kenley's corrosive influence, she'll figure it out. Maybe not immediately, maybe not easily, but eventually she'll understand that sometimes the greatest, most valuable gift a parent can give is the opportunity to prove what you're really made of. I agreed that day, sitting in a small, dusty diner in Oklahoma, while my ex-wife planned her final act of love, meticulously disguised as a financial slight. I signed documents, made solemn promises, and accepted the immense, terrifying responsibility of professionally catching our daughter when she inevitably fell. I just hadn't fully realized how steep the fall would be, or how long it would take her to hit the unforgiving ground. But that was still months away, on a future day when Kenley would celebrate 7 Atlanta estates, while I walked away with a warehouse that everyone else would see as nothing more than a pathetic consolation prize. Some gifts, I was learning, were absolutely worth waiting for, and some plans were simply too complex to explain until the consequences made the lessons impossible to ignore. 12 months before Jacinda's death, the Geological Survey Lab at the University of Oklahoma looked exactly like every testing facility I'd worked with during my professional consulting years. Fluorescent lights, stainless steel analytical equipment, and the particular, clinical smell of precision instruments and scientific discovery. Dr. Sarah Williams, the petroleum geologist I'd contacted through my professional network, spread the core samples and seismic maps across the analysis table like conclusive evidence in a case that would permanently change everything. Elias, these readings are absolutely remarkable, she said, adjusting her safety glasses as she reviewed the spectral analysis results. The shale formation beneath your Oklahoma property shows natural gas and light crude purity levels that rival some of the most profitable mid-continent sources in the world. I stood beside her, my engineer's mind processing the enormous financial implications while my heart raced with the confirmation of what Jacinda and I had suspected. The warehouse property wasn't just sitting on a modest resource, it was sitting on liquid, generational wealth. What kind of commercial viability are we truly talking about? High-grade natural gas extraction, light crude oil deposits, potential helium recovery. This specific formation could easily support multiple, large-scale extraction operations simultaneously without causing source depletion for decades. Dr. Williams pulled up computer models, showing flow rates and projected recharge patterns. Conservatively, you're looking at sustainable extraction rates that would generate $8 to $10 million annually in pure licensing fees alone. Millions. Jacinda had been correct, as usual. But then Jacinda had always been exceptionally good at seeing genuine value where others only saw empty land and abandoned buildings. My phone buzzed with a text from her. Lab results confirmed yet? Meet me at the warehouse at 4 p.m. Time to review our oil patch. The drive from the university to Cushing took me through Oklahoma farm and oil country that most people saw as endless, flat farmland, punctuated by small towns that time had tragically forgotten. But I'd been working this landscape for decades, had learned to read the subtle topographical signs that indicated incredibly valuable resources beneath surfaces that looked utterly unremarkable to outside investors. Jacinda was already waiting when I arrived at the warehouse, her black Mercedes sedan looking glaringly incongruous against the rural setting. She'd lost more weight since our diner meeting, and I noticed she moved with the careful, almost pained deliberation of someone managing chronic pain and conserving rapidly draining energy. "Good news or catastrophic news?" she asked as I climbed out of my Ford. "Extraordinary news. Doctor, Williams says the formation could support multiple commercial operations." I handed her the lab reports. "Jacinda, this property could generate more annual passive income than your entire real estate portfolio." "Could or will?" "Will. I've already had preliminary confidential conversations with corporate development divisions at 3 major energy companies. They're all aggressively interested in long-term extraction contracts." Jacinda smiled, the first genuine, unrestrained expression of happiness I'd seen from her since her diagnosis. "Show me." We walked the property together, me explaining the geological formations that indicated optimal gas flow, her asking questions with the focused intensity that had made her a titan in business. The warehouse itself was massive, but functionally unremarkable, a thick concrete structure that could house manufacturing operations or secure storage facilities. But beneath our feet lay something infinitely more valuable. "The beauty of this," I explained, stopping at a point where the land sloped slightly toward a natural, sheltered depression, is that it's sustainable wealth. Unlike traditional real estate, responsible resource harvesting actually helps maintain reservoir pressure and long-term viability. We could generate reliable income from this land for 50 years without depleting the resource. I caught the slight pronoun slip. The unconscious returned to thinking of Jacinda and myself as an inseparable team despite 6 years of divorce. This is your property, your extremely complex plan. No, Elias, this is our plan now. Our daughter's future. She pulled out a folder thick with legal documents. I need you to completely understand the terms of what I'm asking of you. The papers outlined a complex estate structure designed to transfer ownership of the warehouse and all subsurface rights to me upon Jacinda's death, while the Atlanta properties would go directly to Dawn. But the true complexity lay in the corporate contracts, licensing agreements with Shell, ExxonMobil, and BP that would begin generating passive income the moment extraction operations were properly activated. You've already negotiated the corporate deals. I've been working on this for 8 months, Elias, using Shell corporations, specialized environmental lawyers, subsurface rights specialists. The contracts are signed and legally sealed, just waiting for the final ownership transfer to activate them. I studied the financial projections, my engineering mind automatically calculating guaranteed cash flow, minimal operational costs, and long-term sustainability. The numbers were absolutely staggering. Guaranteed annual royalties starting at $7.8 million, with automatic escalation clauses that would increase payments based on extraction volume and commodity pricing. Jacinda, I struggled to find words adequate to the scope of what she was showing me. This is generational wealth. This could fully support Dawn's family for the rest of their lives. If Dawn learns to value sustainable assets over unsustainable, flashy liabilities, if she discovers the profound difference between earning wealth and merely inheriting complex debt, if she figures out that sometimes the most valuable things look unremarkable and utterly worthless on the surface. The plan was becoming clearer and simultaneously more ruthless, as Jacinda explained the carefully orchestrated financial education she'd designed for our daughter. The Atlanta properties would drain Dawn's resources, force her to make brutally hard decisions about debt and financial priorities, and reveal Kenley's true motivations when luxury suddenly became a catastrophic liability instead of an easy asset. What if she can't handle it? What if the intense financial pressure destroys her instead of constructively teaching her? Then I was tragically wrong about the woman I raised, and you'll be there to help her rebuild from whatever wreckage is left. Jacinda looked out across the 40 acres that would become my unexpected inheritance. But, Elias, I don't believe I'm wrong. Dawn has strong fundamental instincts underneath all the privilege and enabling. She just needs circumstances that force her to finally use them. We spent the entire afternoon walking the property, Jacinda recording a detailed video explanation of her entire plan using her phone camera. She wanted legal documentation, she explained, that would make her explicit intentions absolutely clear if anyone ever questioned her mental capacity or decision-making process. "My name is Jacinda Patrice Monroe," she said, speaking directly into the camera while standing beside the massive warehouse. "I am 71 years old, in full, complete possession of my mental faculties, and I am documenting my estate planning decisions for the sole benefit of my family and legal representatives." She explained the specific financial reality of the Atlanta properties, the sustainable wealth represented by the Oklahoma gas deposit, her grave concerns about Dawn's marriage to Kenley, and her profound faith that eventual hardship would reveal the true character in everyone involved. "I am leaving the warehouse property and all subsurface rights to my ex-husband, Elias Washington, because he discovered its underlying value, because he has the technical expertise to manage its development responsibly, and because he is the only person I fully trust to help my daughter when she needs help most." The video recording took 2 hours, with Jacinda explaining every financial detail, every legal consideration, every hope and fear that had ultimately motivated her decisions. When she finished, we sat on the warehouse loading dock, watching the sun set over Oklahoma farmland that looked ordinary but held extraordinary, hidden potential. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Jacinda? Once the will is read, there's no immediate way back. I've never been more certain of anything in my entire life." She handed me a sealed envelope marked with my name. "Do not open this until after the formal will reading. But Elias, when that difficult day comes, please remember that everything I've done was motivated by a profound, abiding love. Love for Dawn, love for the solid family foundation we built together. Even love for you, Elias. You saved me once, when we were young, and I was too arrogant and privileged to see past my own self-interest. You taught me to look deeper, to value practical substance over transient appearance, to build things that were designed to last, instead of just buying things that impressed people." She stood up slowly, fatigue evident in every single movement. "Now I need you to save our daughter the exact same way." Driving home that evening, I carried with me the full, heavy weight of Jacinda's plan, the sealed letter that would explain everything after her death, and the quiet knowledge that in less than a year, I would inherit wealth beyond anything I'd ever truly imagined. But more than that, I carried the solemn responsibility of catching Dawn when she fell, of helping her discover who she really was when everything she thought she wanted had been stripped away. Some inheritances, I was learning, came with obligations that lasted infinitely longer than the assets themselves, and some plans required more absolute faith than fear, more love than cold logic, and more patience than most people possessed. But Jacinda had always been brilliant at seeing potential in the unlikeliest of places. She'd seen it in me 32 years ago. Now she was betting everything that she'd see it in our daughter when the final test inevitably came. The sealed letter lay on my kitchen table like a powerful, loaded weapon. I wasn't entirely sure I was ready to fire it. 2 weeks had passed since the will reading. 2 weeks of watching social media posts from Atlanta as Kenley meticulously documented his massive inheritance with the desperate enthusiasm of someone who just won the lottery and intended to spend every penny as publicly possible. Instagram stories of champagne toasts, Facebook posts about blessed beyond measure, TikTok videos of him dancing through empty estates while upbeat music played over captions like "From humble beginnings to Atlanta estate king, inherited, blessed living my best life." Meanwhile, Dawn had called 4 times, each conversation shorter and more obviously strained than the last. She was desperately trying to navigate between her husband's manic celebration and her father's apparent quiet disappointment. Caught directly in the middle of a complex situation she didn't understand and wasn't equipped to handle. I poured myself a glass of the iced tea Jacinda used to bring when she visited a modest herbal blend from a local tea shop, and finally opened the envelope that would explain absolutely everything. My dearest Elias, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've just put up with what I imagine was a rather spectacular and extremely loud performance from our extended family. Kenley has probably posted 27 photos of Atlanta estates by now, and Dawn is likely wondering why her mother left her father with what everyone thinks is a completely worthless warehouse. First, let me state this clearly. I am incredibly proud of you, proud of the man you became after our separation, proud of the way you rebuilt your life on your own practical terms, proud of the undeniable fact that you never once needed my money to prove your worth to anyone, least of all me. Second, let me explain precisely why I needed you to experience today's public humiliation before you could fully understand today's profound gift. Elias, our daughter has never truly failed at anything important. Not really. Every disappointment in her life has been thoroughly cushioned by immense wealth. Every mistake has been immediately corrected by limitless resources. Every natural consequence has been delayed or avoided entirely by privilege. She's 40 years old, and she's never once had to choose between paying rent and buying essential groceries. She's never had to sacrifice something she desperately wanted for something she fundamentally needed. She's never had to discover what she's actually made of when every easy comfort is taken away. More importantly, she's never had to truly see Kenley without the protective, obscuring shield of financial security. She's never seen what he truly becomes when luxury is severely threatened, when social status is in genuine jeopardy, when the Monroe name stops opening exclusive doors and starts creating catastrophic debt obligations. The Atlanta estates are magnificent, Elias. They are also overwhelming financial disasters. 7 luxury properties, with combined monthly carrying costs of $95,000. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance, utility bills. I've calculated every expense down to the specific landscaping contracts. Dawn's current income covers maybe 60% of those monthly costs. The rest will come directly from her personal savings, which will last approximately 6 months if she tries to maintain all 7 properties. After that, she'll have to start making difficult choices. Hard choices. Adult choices. The kind of choices that reveal inner character instead of merely testing credit scores. Meanwhile, you'll be sitting on the most valuable natural gas rights in the mid-continent, generating more monthly passive income than all 7 Atlanta estates combined, completely debt-free, with a sustainable resource that will appreciate for the next 50 years. But here's the crucial, strategic part, Elias. Dawn doesn't know that yet, and she won't know until she's had sufficient time to truly learn what intense financial pressure feels like, what it means to be married to someone who fundamentally loves status more than long-term stability, what it truly costs to maintain appearances when you cannot afford the cold reality behind them. I need you to wait. I need you to let her fall. Not because I want her to suffer, but because she needs to understand that the real safety net was never the money itself. It was always the people who loved her enough to catch her when she finally fell. When that day comes, and it absolutely will come, you'll be there. Not as her wealthy father rescuing her from consequences, but as the man who taught me to always look deeper, to value honest substance over surface flash, to build things that lasted instead of just buying things that impressed people. The corporate contracts are already signed and legally sealed. Shell, Exxon, BP, they're all waiting for you to formally activate the extraction agreements. The first quarterly royalty payment will arrive within 90 days of my death. $7.8 million with automatic increases built into every contract. Use the money wisely. Use it to help Dawn rebuild her life based on character and integrity instead of empty inheritance. Use it to show Kenley what real, sustainable wealth looks like. Not 7 mortgaged estates, but functional, generating resources managed by someone who fundamentally understands the difference between profitable assets and crippling liabilities. And Elias, please use some of it for yourself. Buy something completely frivolous. Take a long vacation. Live a little. You've spent 68 years taking care of everyone else's infrastructure. It's finally time someone took care of yours. I love you. I always did. The divorce didn't change that. It simply changed the operational form. You were my greatest teacher, my closest friend, and the man who made me want to be worthy of the profound love you gave so freely. Our daughter will understand eventually. When the high society phone calls stop coming, when the credit cards are fully maxed out. When Kenley finally shows her who he really is, that's when she'll remember the important lessons you tried to teach her about character, integrity, and choosing practical substance over temporary style. Until then, enjoy your warehouse. Enjoy your subsurface rights. Enjoy watching our daughter discover what she's really made of, when everything she thought she wanted turns out to cost more than she can possibly afford. With all my love and gratitude, Jacinda. P.S. The key in this envelope opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank of Cushing, Box 247. Inside, you'll find the original corporate contracts, geological surveys, and a bottle of high-end champagne I've been saving for the exact day you finally got everything you truly deserved. Open it when Dawn comes home. I read the letter 3 times, my emotions cycling through profound grief, quiet admiration, lingering frustration, and something that might have been vast relief. Jacinda had orchestrated all of this. The public humiliation, the apparent financial inequality, the family celebration of what they thought was her final, cold judgment on our relative worth. But she'd also orchestrated my rescue. Not just financial rescue, but the kind of public vindication that would prove to everyone who'd ever underestimated me that their assessment had been catastrophically, embarrassingly wrong. My phone rang. Dawn's number again. "Dad, I just wanted to check on you. I know today was difficult with the will reading and everything. How are you handling your massive inheritance, sweetheart?" "It's completely overwhelming. Kenley's already hired a 4th interior designer for the main estate. He wants to start custom renovations next month. Maybe throw a huge society party to celebrate." Her voice carried a distinct note of uncertainty that hadn't been present during the will reading. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did Mom ever mention anything specific about the ongoing costs of maintaining those properties? Like monthly expenses, property taxes, that specific kind of thing?" I felt my heart clench for my daughter, who was just beginning to glimpse the mathematical reality behind her windfall. "Did you ask the estate lawyer about any ongoing financial obligations?" I tried to, but Kenley said he'd handle all the financial planning. He's good with numbers, and he's excited about the opportunity to really make these properties shine. She paused. "But Dad, I looked up property taxes on a comparable Atlanta estate last night for just one house. The annual taxes are more than I make in 3 months. And you have 7 houses. 7 houses, she repeated. And I heard the first tangible crack in her voice. The first painful recognition that gifts could sometimes be far more expensive than anyone ever anticipated. "Dawn, I want you to promise me something." "What?" "Before you sign any renovation contracts or take on any additional debt, have an independent, third-party accountant review all the financial obligations. Promise me you'll understand exactly what you're committing to before you commit to it." "Dad, why do you sound like you know something I don't?" I looked at Jacinda's letter, at her careful explanation of controlled financial education and necessary life lessons, and realized that my ex-wife had understood our daughter better than Dawn understood herself. "I know that your mother loved you more than you realize, and I know that sometimes the most expensive, painful lessons are also the most valuable ones." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet loft, holding the key to a safety deposit box that contained corporate contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. While 400 miles away, in her expensive, heavily mortgaged estate, my daughter was probably calculating property taxes and wondering why her inheritance suddenly felt more like a terrifying burden than an easy blessing. Some gifts, I was learning, came with hidden instructions that weren't immediately obvious. But eventually, if you were patient and observant and willing to learn from your own mistakes, the lessons became perfectly clear. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the people who loved you most were waiting to catch you when you finally understood the fundamental difference between what you wanted and what you actually needed. 3 weeks after the will reading, I was reviewing geological surveys at my workbench when Dawn's panicked phone call completely shattered my quiet evening. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Her voice carried a desperate strain I hadn't heard since she was 12 and had accidentally wrecked my classic woodworking lathe. But this wasn't childhood mischief. This was adult, cold terror. "What's critically wrong, sweetheart? How much do you actually know about Mom's real financial situation before she passed away?" I mean her real financial situation. I set down the natural gas rights documentation I'd been reviewing. My engineer's mind immediately calculated the implications of her question. 3 weeks was exactly how long it would take for someone to receive the first quarterly property tax assessments on 7 Atlanta estates. Dawn, what exactly has happened? The bills, Dad. Sweet Jesus. The bills. Her voice cracked slightly. Property taxes on 7 houses, not for the entire year, just for this quarter come to. Yuan Batchen. $218,000, Dad. That's more than I make in an entire year. I close my eyes, remembering Jacinda's meticulous calculations, her mathematical precision in designing this exact momento financial revelation. Have you too, Octo Kenley, about this specific expense? Kenley says, not a worry. Hesas rich people always find creative ways to handle property taxes. That mamas have accountants and financial strategists who manage this kind of complexity. His laugh was bitter and sharp. He hired 2 more interior designers and ordered a custom 6-foot marble art installation for the main estate's foyer, $218,000, Dad. That's more than I make in an entire year. I closed my eyes, remembering Jacinda's meticulous calculations, her mathematical precision in designing this exact moment of financial revelation. Have you talked to Kenley about this specific expense? Kenley says, not to worry. He says rich people always find creative ways to handle property taxes. That Mom must have had accountants and financial strategists who manage this kind of complexity. His laugh was bitter and sharp. He's hired 2 more interior designers and ordered a custom 6-foot marble art installation for the main estate's foyer, $218,000, Dad. That's more than I make in an entire year. He closed my eyes, remembering Jacinda's meticulous calculations, her mathematical precision in designing this exact moment of financial revelation. Have you talked to Kenley about this specific expense? Kenley says, not a worry. Hesas rich people always find creative ways to handle property taxes. That must have had accountants and financial strategists who managed his kind of complexity. His laugh was bitter and sharp. He hired 2 more interior design. Ersan ordered a custom 6-foot marble art installation for the main estate's foyer. $60,000 for a sculpture, because we need to live up to the property's aesthetic potential, and the mortgage payments. That's the other thing. Mom didn't leave us these houses free and clear. There are complex escalating mortgages on 6 of them, with combined monthly payments of, I heard papers rustling, $73,000 a month. $73,000 monthly, plus property taxes, plus insurance, plus massive maintenance costs, on 7 luxury properties that required constant, high-end upkeep to retain their market value. Jacinda hadn't just given Dawn houses. She'd given her a complex financial time bomb with an extremely short fuse. Dawn, how long can you realistically afford to maintain those obligations? 4 months? Maybe 5, if I liquidate my entire retirement accounts and max out every single credit card I can qualify for. The desperation in her voice was growing more pronounced. Dad, I think Mom made a profound mistake. I think the lawyers screwed something up because there's no way she would have intentionally left me with this crushing debt burden. Oh, my sweet girl. Your mother made exactly the strategic decisions she intended to make. Have you seriously considered selling some of the properties? Kenley absolutely won't hear of it. He says selling would be a catastrophic betrayal of Mom's vision and an abandonment of the family legacy. He's already planning a huge 4th of July society party at the main house, invited 300 people, hired a well-known event planner. Her voice was rising toward hysteria. Dad, he ordered a custom fireworks display that cost $15,000. $15,000 for an explosion that's going to last 6 minutes. I thought about my own inheritance, sitting 400 miles away in a seemingly worthless warehouse, generating more monthly passive income than Dawn's 7 estates combined. But Jacinda had been correct about the precise timing. Dawn desperately needed to understand the immense weight of her debt burden before she could possibly appreciate the lightness of real, sustainable financial security. Dawn, what do you need from me right now? I need to know if Mom ever mentioned anything about backup plans, emergency funds, additional assets that aren't specifically in the will, anything that might help me figure out how to handle this catastrophic situation. The safety deposit box key sat in my tool chest, surrounded by the corporate contracts that would solve all of Dawn's financial problems instantly and permanently. But opening that box now would deprive her of the critical education Jacinda had designed. would prevent her from learning the profound difference between earned security and inherited, crippling debt. Sweetheart, your mother was always meticulously careful with money. If she left you those properties, she believed you could ultimately handle them. But what if I can't? What if I'm not smart enough or strong enough or whatever enough to manage this level of financial responsibility? The vulnerability in her voice broke my heart, but I forced myself to remember Jacinda's letter, her careful explanation of necessary lessons and controlled failures. Dawn, what exactly does Kenley say when you express these immense financial concerns to him? He tells me I'm being negative, that successful people don't focus on problems, they focus on creative opportunities, that I need to think bigger and embrace abundance. His laugh was hollow. Yesterday, he suggested we take out additional, high-interest loans against the properties to fund more renovations that would maximize our lifestyle potential. More debt, more leverage, more commitment to a financial structure that was already well beyond Dawn's ability to sustain. Kenley wasn't just failing to help, he was actively and aggressively accelerating her financial destruction. Dawn, I want you to do one thing for me. I want you to sit down with Kenley and have a serious, non-negotiable conversation about selling at least 4 of the properties. Use the immediate proceeds to pay off the mortgages on the remaining 3 and create a sustainable, manageable financial situation. She'll never agree to that. Why not? Because she paused, and I could almost hear her processing the devastating implications of her own words. Because he's already told everyone about the 7 houses, posted hundreds of pictures on social media, bragged to his friends, used them as absolute proof that he married into real generational money. Selling any of them would be a public admission that we cannot afford to maintain them. And how do you personally feel about that specific reasoning? I feel like I'm currently drowning, Dad. I feel like I inherited a sinking anchor disguised as a life preserver, and my husband is aggressively telling me to dive deeper instead of swimming desperately toward shore. The analogy was more accurate than Dawn realized. Jacinda had indeed given her an anchor. 7 anchors, actually. Each one heavy enough to drag her under if she couldn't figure out how to cut herself free from the crippling debt. Dawn, what would happen if you made this hard decision without Kenley's agreement? If you simply decided that financial survival was fundamentally more important than maintaining a false appearance? 1. She was quiet for a long, painful time. I don't know. We've never profoundly disagreed about anything major before. He usually handles all the big, strategic decisions, and I just go along with whatever he thinks is best because his judgment has been so reliable in other areas. What do you mean? I thought about the $60,000 marble sculpture, the $15,000 fireworks display, the 5 interior designers working simultaneously on properties that couldn't generate enough rental income to cover their basic carrying costs. I mean that someone who spends $60,000 on a decorative item while you're calculating whether you can afford property taxes might not have the essential financial judgment required to manage a 7-property portfolio. Dad, are you saying Kenley doesn't understand money? I'm saying that understanding money and being excessively excited about spending money are 2 very different, often opposing, skill sets. After we hung up, I sat in my loft, thinking about the profound difference between teaching and rescuing, between helping someone learn and actively enabling someone to avoid learning. Jacinda had designed Dawn's inheritance to be a crucial educational experience, but education required letting students make painful mistakes and fully experience the resultant consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, a photo of Kenley raising a champagne glass in what appeared to be a very expensive, exclusive Miami restaurant, with a caption that read, "Celebrating the Monroe Legacy. Miami Chuck Living. Just blessed." The photo had been tagged with Dawn's name, but she wasn't in the frame. She was probably home, calculating debt service payments, and trying to figure out how to afford the unsustainable lifestyle her husband was aggressively broadcasting to the world. Some lessons, I realized, were simply harder to learn than others. Some teachers had to painfully watch their students struggle with complex problems that had clear, obvious solutions, waiting for the precise moment when professional help would be constructive education rather than mere enablement. And some inheritances came with instructions that required more courage than money, more wisdom than wealth, and more love than cold logic. Jacinda had been right about one thing. Our daughter was about to discover what she was truly made of when everything she thought she wanted turned out to cost more than she could sustain. The The question was whether she would learn those lessons quickly enough to save herself, or whether she would need to lose absolutely everything before she fundamentally understood the difference between profit-generating assets and crippling liabilities. Either way, I would be here when she was finally ready to rebuild her life based on character and integrity instead of empty inheritance. Some safety nets, after all, were worth patiently waiting to deploy. The confrontation came on a humid Tuesday afternoon in late July, when Kenley arrived at my loft building without calling. His face was flushed with the kind of intense, destructive rage that comes from watching carefully constructed plans completely collapse in real time. I saw him through my living room window, marching across the parking lot in Italian loafers that were completely impractical for Atlanta pavement, clutching his designer briefcase like a heavy weapon. The luxury German sedan he was driving, a recent purchase to match their new lifestyle, sat in a visitor space with the engine still audibly running. The doorbell rang with sharp, insistent bursts that suggested someone who'd moved past polite social conventions into pure, desperate panic. "Elias, we need to talk," Kenley announced, the moment I opened the security door, pushing past me into my modest living room without waiting for a formal invitation. "This absolute nonsense has gone far enough." He looked around my loft with the kind of dismissive assessment I'd seen him use at low-end consignment shops, cataloging, evaluating, dismissing most of what he saw as unworthy of his personal attention. His gaze lingered on my robust handmade furniture, my modest television, my collection of engineering and architectural textbooks arranged on simple wooden shelves. "Kenley, what exactly can I do for you today? You can stop this ridiculous pretense that you don't know what is happening." He turned to face me, his perfectly styled hair slightly mussed, his expensive makeup unable to fully hide the deep stress fractures around his eyes. "Dawn is talking seriously about selling 5 of the Atlanta properties. 5 of them! Elias, do you comprehend what that catastrophic failure means? It means she's finally attempting to create a sustainable financial situation. It means she's giving up. It means she's allowing Jacinda's entire legacy to be tragically carved up and sold off because she doesn't possess the strategic vision to see the bigger long-term picture." Kenley began pacing my small living room like a nervous, caged animal. "Those houses represent everything Jacinda worked for, everything the Monroe family name stands for. They are not merely properties. They are powerful symbols of immense, undeniable success." I settled into my reading chair, the same one I'd owned for 25 years, and studied my former son-in-law with the detached, professional curiosity of an engineer examining a structural failure in progress. "Kenley, what do you sincerely believe Jacinda's primary concern was when she meticulously planned her estate?" "Preserving the family wealth, maintaining the Monroe reputation, making absolutely sure her legacy lived on through the properties and high-stakes investments she'd built over a lifetime of hard work. And if those properties are currently bankrupting her only child, they are not bankrupting anyone." The words exploded out of him with enough pure force to make my neighbor's dog start barking loudly through the thin walls. Wealthy people do not go bankrupt from owning too many high-end houses. They find creative ways to make it work. They take out strategic loans. They leverage assets brilliantly. They think creatively about solutions. How much creative thinking have you personally done about generating $73,000 in monthly mortgage payments? Kenley's face went pale beneath his carefully applied foundation. "How do you know about the exact mortgage payments?" Dawn told me. "She's been calling every few days asking for my professional advice about managing the crushing financial obligations Jacinda intentionally left her. Those are incredibly private family matters. Dawn shouldn't be discussing our private finances with anyone, even you, even his father. Even his father, who received a publicly worthless warehouse while we inherited valuable, complex real estate that requires sophisticated management strategies." I almost smiled at that assessment. Sophisticated management strategies, from a man whose idea of financial planning involved maxing out credit cards to fund custom marble sculptures and fireworks displays. "Kenley, tell me about these sophisticated management strategies." He straightened his shoulders, adopting the confident posture he used when explaining financial concepts to people he considered intellectually inferior. "We are actively exploring several viable options. Additional high-interest financing against the properties to fund renovations that will dramatically increase their rental value. Corporate partnerships with high-end luxury vacation rental companies. Maybe selling a select few properties at significant, immediate profits, and using the proceeds to develop the remaining ones into even more valuable, high-end assets. I listened to him recite what sounded like rehearsed talking points from a late-night real estate infomercial, watching his face grow more animated as he convinced himself that crippling debt could be instantly transformed into unimaginable wealth through sheer force of will and positive thinking. And if those aggressive strategies don't work, they will work. They absolutely have to work. Kenley stopped pacing and fixed me with the kind of intense stare he probably thought was intimidating. But Elias, there's something critically important you need to understand. Dawn is starting to listen to extremely negative influences. People who don't fundamentally understand wealth, who are scared of taking big risks for big rewards. People like me, people like you. He moved closer, his voice dropping to the conspiratorial tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable while saying something utterly ridiculous. I know you mean well, but you've never operated at this level of financial complexity. You've never managed multiple multi-million-dollar properties or dealt with the kind of complex tax strategies and investment opportunities that come with real wealth. You're entirely correct. I've never once owned 7 mortgaged estates that cost more to maintain than they generate in income. I see. You're thinking too small. You're focused entirely on monthly cash flow instead of long-term asset appreciation and lifestyle maximization. Kenley pulled out his phone and began scrolling through photos. Look at what we're building, Elias. Look at the life we're creating. The photos were indeed impressive, I had to admit. Beautifully decorated rooms, infinity pools, flawlessly reflecting Atlanta sunsets, parties with attractive people, holding expensive drinks in stunning settings. It looked exactly like the lifestyle magazines that Kenley had been reading religiously for the past 5 years. It's very beautiful, I said honestly. How much is it currently costing? Investment requires significant capital expenditure. You cannot possibly build wealth without aggressively spending money to maximize asset potential. He swiped to another photo. A catered party on what appeared to be a rented yacht. This is what undeniable success looks like, Elias. This is exactly what Jacinda wanted for her family. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, returning with 2 glasses of iced tea and the manila folder I'd been professionally preparing for this inevitable conversation. Kenley, can I show you something absolutely critical? What? I opened the folder and spread out detailed financial projections, debt service calculations, and rigorous cash flow analyses that I'd prepared using the same engineering precision I'd once applied to complex infrastructure projects. These are the absolute cold numbers for your 7 Atlanta properties. Monthly carrying costs, annual property taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities, everything required to maintain them at the unsustainable level you're posting on social media. Kenley glanced at the papers dismissively. Numbers can be manipulated to support any conclusion. Successful people focus on expansive possibilities, not artificial limitations. Kenley, based on Dawn's current income and your current reckless spending rate, you will be professionally bankrupt within 4 months. That's utterly ridiculous. 4 months. And that's assuming you stop all non-essential spending today and don't take on any additional crushing debt. You clearly don't understand how wealth accumulation works, Elias. Rich people don't worry about simple monthly cash flow. They think in terms of complex equity, massive appreciation, long-term value creation. Rich people also fundamentally understand the difference between profit-generating assets and crippling liabilities, I interrupted. Between income-producing investments and high-interest, debt-financed lifestyle purchases. What is that supposed to profoundly mean? I pulled out another set of documents, the geological surveys and subsurface rights assessments that Jacinda had originally commissioned for the Oklahoma warehouse property. It means that sometimes the most immensely valuable things don't look valuable to people who only understand superficial, surface appearances. Kenley leaned over the papers, his expression shifting from confident dismissiveness to genuine confusion, to something rapidly approaching full-blown panic as he realized the nature of what he was reading. These are subsurface mineral rights assessments for your worthless warehouse property. Natural gas and light crude oil extraction rights, specifically for one of the purest shale sources in the mid-continent. I don't understand what any of this is supposed to mean. It means that my publicly worthless warehouse sits on top of natural gas and oil rights worth approximately $8 million annually in pure licensing fees. The color drained completely from Kenley's face. That's not possible. I pulled out the original corporate contracts. Shell, ExxonMobil, BP, each one bearing signatures and dates that prove their undeniable authenticity. $7.8 million in guaranteed quarterly royalty payments, starting 90 days after Jacinda's death. Renewable contracts with automatic escalation clauses. $8 million annually. Kenley's voice was barely a strangled whisper. More than your 7 Atlanta houses could possibly generate in rental income, even if they were completely debt-free and fully occupied year-round. He stared at the contracts, his hands shaking noticeably as he processed the sheer, immense magnitude of what I was showing him. Jacinda knew about this. She knew when she wrote the will. Jacinda commissioned the geological surveys. She personally negotiated the corporate contracts. She understood exactly what she was strategically giving each of us. But that means he looked up at me with the expression of someone whose fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality were collapsing in a fiery wreck. That means you're wealthy. Truly wealthy. I'm financially secure in a way that doesn't depend on borrowed money or unsustainable debt service. Kenley sat down heavily in my second-hand chair, the intense, desperate fight going out of him like air from a punctured balloon. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let everyone think you got the publicly worthless inheritance? Because Dawn desperately needed to learn the profound difference between true wealth and unsustainable debt, between profit-generating assets and debt-consuming liabilities, between a father who loved her and a husband who only loved her money. He was quiet for a long, agonizing time, staring at the contracts that proved his fundamental assumption about Jacinda's final judgment had been catastrophically wrong. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a raw note of desperation I'd never heard before. What happens now? Now you and Dawn must decide whether you want to build a sustainable life based on cold, hard financial reality, or continue pursuing lifestyle fantasies that will inevitably destroy everything Jacinda actually left behind. And if we choose wrong? I looked at this young man who'd spent 5 years treating me like an embarrassment to the Monroe family name, who'd celebrated my apparent poverty with such theatrical, callous enthusiasm, who was now discovering that his fundamental understanding of wealth had been as shallow as his understanding of basic character. If you choose wrong, you will learn what it actually costs to maintain 7 high-interest mortgaged estates when you don't have the sustainable income to support them. And you'll just watch us completely fail? I'll be here when Dawn is finally ready to learn the tough lessons her mother tried to teach her. Whether you are still part of that painful learning process, or merely part of what she needs to learn from, is now entirely up to you. As Kenley left my loft, his Italian loafers clicking against the pavement with significantly less confident rhythm than they'd carried when he'd arrived, I realized that Jacinda's plan was working exactly as she'd rigorously intended. The education was brutal, but it was absolutely thorough, and sometimes the most expensive lessons were also the most fundamentally valuable ones. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in late August, jolting me from the deepest sleep I'd had in weeks. Dawn's name glowed on my phone screen, and I knew without answering that the crucial education Jacinda had designed had reached its inevitable, painful conclusion. Dad. Her voice was raw, broken in a way I hadn't heard since she was 8 years old, and her favorite childhood dog had died. I'm so sorry to wake you, but I need help, Dad. Where are you right now? Sitting in my car outside the bankruptcy attorney's office. I have a formal appointment in 6 hours. Her laugh was hollow, desperate. Turns out, you can't creatively leverage your way out of debt when you don't have any actual reliable assets to leverage. I pulled on my robe and walked to my kitchen, methodically making coffee, while Dawn told me the devastating story of the past month. The cascade of financial failures that had consumed everything she'd mistakenly thought she owned. We lost 3 of the houses last week. Foreclosure. The bank seized them when we missed the 3rd consecutive mortgage payment. Her voice was steady now. The strange, forced calm that comes only after panic has completely burned itself out. Kenley hired an aggressive lawyer to fight it. But you can't fight math, Dad. You simply cannot argue with numbers that don't add up. What about the other 4 properties? We're selling them. Fire sale prices. Because everyone in Atlanta knows we are desperate. We'll be lucky to walk away with enough to pay off the remaining mortgages and the enormous credit card debt. She paused, and I heard the sound of early morning traffic in the background, the city waking up around my daughter's financial catastrophe. The lawyer says we might clear $200,000 after absolutely everything is settled, if we're lucky. $200,000 from an inheritance that had seemed worth tens of millions just 4 months ago. Jacinda's brutal, cold mathematics had played out exactly as she'd calculated. And Kenley? Kenley, Dawn's voice broke slightly. Kenley formally filed for divorce yesterday. His lawyer is demanding half of whatever's left after the bankruptcy, plus alimony. Plus, he wants me to assume total responsibility for all the massive debt he accumulated trying to maximize our lifestyle potential. I closed my eyes, feeling immense grief for my daughter's pain and cold recognition that this moment had been entirely inevitable. From the first day Kenley had celebrated inheriting 7 estates without understanding their true, crushing cost. Dawn, where are you currently staying? Extended stay hotel near the airport. It's cheap, and they don't ask many intrusive questions when you pay in cash. Her laugh was bitterly self-deprecating. It's amazing how fast your entire social circle disappears when they realize you can't even afford to split the check at the high-end restaurants they frequent. Sweetheart, I'm coming to get you. Dad, no. I sincerely appreciate the offer, but I need to handle this myself. I need to figure out how to rebuild from whatever small portion is left after the lawyers finish picking through the wreckage. You don't have to rebuild alone. Yes, I do, Dad. Because if I don't learn how to stand entirely on my own 2 feet now, I will never, ever learn. Her voice was getting stronger, more determined. I've spent 40 years having other people immediately solve my problems for me. Mom with money, Kenley with major decisions, you with patient, wise advice I was too stupid to take. This is my complete mess, and I need to be the one who finally cleans it up. I felt a surge of profound pride for my daughter, recognizing in her words the first clear evidence of the self-sufficient woman Jacinda had hoped she could become. But I also felt the immense, heavy weight of the sealed envelope in my tool chest, the key that could solve every single problem Dawn was facing if I chose to reveal Jacinda's final gift prematurely. Dawn, what if I told you that your mother completely anticipated this exact moment? That she had specific plans in place to help you rebuild when you were finally ready to learn from what had happened? I'd say that Mom was a lot smarter than her daughter, and that whatever help she arranged, I probably don't deserve it after the incredibly bad choices I've made. What if I told you that you absolutely do deserve it? That everything that's happened was deliberately designed to teach you crucial lessons you desperately needed to learn? Dad, what in the world are you talking about? I thought about Jacinda's letter, her careful explanation of controlled education and necessary consequences, about the warehouse in Oklahoma that Dawn still publicly believed was worthless, about the corporate contracts that could provide financial security for the rest of her life, about the plan that absolutely required Dawn to lose everything before she could possibly appreciate what real, sustainable wealth actually meant. I'm talking about coming home, sweetheart. Not to Atlanta, not to your old life, but to Oklahoma, to the warehouse that everyone thinks is completely worthless. The warehouse? Dad, I really don't understand. Pack whatever few things fit in your car and drive to Cushing, Oklahoma. There's something I need to personally show you. Something your mother strategically left that you are not going to fully understand until you see it with your own eyes. Is this about that warehouse Mom left you? Dad, I know you're desperately trying to help, but I simply cannot accept charity from you too. I've already cost my family enough. It's not charity, Dawn. It's education. The final, most critical lesson your mother designed for you, but you had to earn the right to learn it. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen, waiting for the sun to rise, and thinking about the fundamental difference between rescuing someone and teaching them how to rescue themselves, between enabling weakness and constructively rewarding growth, between helping someone avoid difficult consequences and helping them learn from the consequences they'd already bravely survived. At 8 a.m., I drove to First National Bank of Cushing and opened the safety deposit box that contained Jacinda's final, spectacular surprise. The corporate contracts, the geological surveys, the bottle of high-end champagne she'd been saving for this very moment. Everything was exactly where she'd promised it would be. I also found something she hadn't explicitly mentioned in her letter. A legally executed deed transferring half ownership of the warehouse property to Dawn, with an attached note explaining the corporate structure that would make her an equal, 50% partner in the natural gas rights operation. Jacinda hadn't just planned to catch our daughter when she fell. She'd planned to give her the concrete tools to build something infinitely sustainable from the inevitable wreckage of her Atlanta dreams, but only after Dawn had conclusively learned the difference between inherited wealth and earned wisdom. Dawn arrived that evening, driving a 10-year-old SUV with absolutely everything she owned packed into the back seat. She looked older, thinner, visibly worn down by months of crushing financial pressure and social humiliation. But there was a noticeable difference in her posture, something that quietly suggested she'd lost far more than just money in Atlanta. She'd lost fundamental, limiting illusions about herself and the highly privileged world she'd always inhabited. "Dad, this place looks exactly the same as when I was a little girl." "Some things don't need to change, sweetheart. They just need to be profoundly appreciated for what they actually are instead of what they temporarily appear to be." I led her inside the massive warehouse, to the large conference table, where I'd spread out all the crucial documents Jacinda had left. The subsurface rights assessments, the corporate contracts, the rigorous financial projections that showed sustainable, clean wealth instead of flashy, crippling debt. "Dawn, your mother left you something much, much more valuable than 7 Atlanta estates. She left you the profound opportunity to build real, sustainable wealth based on renewable resources and sound, ethical business principles." I watched my daughter's face as she processed the complex geological surveys, the major corporate agreements, the cold mathematical proof that the warehouse she'd always considered publicly worthless was actually the foundational key to generational wealth. "She knew," Dawn whispered, her voice filled with awe and something that might have been profound, agonizing grief. "She knew I'd lose absolutely everything in Atlanta. She knew Kenley would leave. She knew I'd inevitably end up here, broke and desperate, and finally ready to genuinely listen. She knew you desperately needed to learn the difference between true wealth and massive debt. Between a father who loved you and a husband who only loved your money. Between building something lasting and simply buying something impressive. And she knew you'd be here to professionally catch me when I fell. We're going to catch each other, sweetheart. Partners in something your mother built, but we're going to collaboratively develop something new together. Something based on character and integrity instead of empty inheritance. On sustainable resources instead of leveraged, broken dreams." That night, Dawn and I opened Jacinda's champagne and toasted the quiet beginning of a new partnership that would fundamentally honor everything valuable about the Monroe legacy while decisively abandoning everything that had been destroying it from within. Some educations, I was learning, were absolutely worth the immense price of losing everything you thought you wanted, and some inheritances were worth patiently waiting 40 years to finally receive. 6 months later, I stood in the renovated warehouse office, watching Dawn review quarterly royalty reports with the focused, intense attention of someone who'd learned the hard, painful way to understand every single number that appeared on a financial statement. The corporate contracts were generating exactly what Jacinda had projected, $7.8 million every 3 months, with automatic escalation clauses that would increase payments as extraction volumes grew. "Shell wants to aggressively expand their operation by 40%, Dawn said, looking up from the Exxon quarterly assessment. "They're projecting immense demand increases that would bump our licensing fees to $10.2 million per quarter within 18 months. What do you think, Dad?" "I think we need to rigorously study the environmental impact projections before we agree to any extraction increases. Sustainable income only works if the resource remains fundamentally sustainable." She gestured toward the geological surveys spread across her desk. "The aquifer and shale formation can handle increased extraction, but we need to make absolutely sure we're not sacrificing long-term stability for short-term profits." I smiled, recognizing in Dawn's careful, ethical analysis the engineering mindset that valued practical substance over superficial appearance, sustainability over reckless exploitation. Jacinda would have been intensely proud to see our daughter applying lessons learned through financial catastrophe to business decisions that would affect generations. The warehouse had been completely transformed over the past months from abandoned storage space into a functioning corporate headquarters and training facility. Not luxurious, we'd deliberately chosen efficiency and functionality over empty impression, but professional, comfortable, and brilliantly designed to accommodate immense future growth. Dawn had moved into a small apartment above the office, embracing the quiet simplicity of a life built around challenging, meaningful work rather than a lifestyle that merely impressed shallow people. "There's something else," Dawn said, pulling out a letter marked with a return address I didn't immediately recognize. "This came yesterday." The return address was from a federal correctional facility in Georgia. Kenley's name was printed in the corner, and my heart clenched with a flicker of unexpected cold sympathy for whatever circumstances had led my former son-in-law to prison. What exactly happened to him? Wire fraud. He convinced three elderly investors to put substantial money into a fake real estate development scheme, promising them luxury vacation properties that didn't exist. Don's voice was careful, controlled. He got 18 months and full restitution requirements. I thought about the man who'd celebrated inheriting 7 Atlanta estates with such theatrical, callous enthusiasm, who'd spent money like someone who'd never learned the fundamental difference between profit-generating assets and crippling liabilities, who'd treated marriage like a business acquisition and family like a networking opportunity. What does he want now? To apologize. And to formally ask if we'd consider hiring him for the re-entry program we're starting next month. The re-entry program, another smart expansion of Don's vision for community development, providing intensive job training and transitional support for people leaving the criminal justice system, helping them rebuild their shattered lives through honest work and genuine skill development. Do you genuinely want to hire him? I want to do what is objectively right, not what feels emotionally good. Not what provides simple emotional satisfaction, but what is actually right for everyone involved. Don looked out at the community infrastructure we'd built, at the gardens where former students were growing fresh food for the local farmers market, at the workshop where current students were building furniture that would be sold to fund future expansion. And what do you believe is objectively right? I think Kenley needs to learn the exact same painful lessons I had to learn. That security and worth come from what you build, not what you merely inherit. That respect comes from contribution, not consumption. That real, sustainable wealth means having something valuable and ethical to offer other people. And you truly think he's ready to learn those specific lessons? I think he's finally desperate enough to at least consider learning them. Prison has a profoundly clarifying way of prioritizing life goals that 7 Atlanta estates simply couldn't provide. I read Kenley's letter, while Don continued explaining his thoughts about the re-entry program. His handwriting was different, smaller, more careful, lacking the confident, arrogant loops and flourishes that had characterized his signature on high-interest mortgage documents. Don, I know I have absolutely no right to ask for anything from you or your family, but I'm hoping you might consider giving me the chance to earn forgiveness rather than just simply requesting it. I've spent 2 years thinking deeply about the choices I made, the terrible person I became, the callous way I treated people who deserved fundamentally better from me. I understand now that I was never truly married to you. I was merely married to a flawed idea of what your family could financially provide for me. I understand that I treated your father like a low-status obstacle rather than recognizing him as someone who'd spent his entire life building the kind of functional character I'd never bothered to develop. I don't expect immediate forgiveness, but I'm hoping for the opportunity to conclusively prove that prison taught me something about the essential difference between wanting things and honestly earning things. If you have any place in your programs for someone who needs to learn how to constructively contribute instead of just consume, I'd be eternally grateful for the chance. I know you're building something immensely important in Oklahoma. I've been following the news coverage of your community development work, and I'm sincerely proud of what you've accomplished, even though I have no right to feel proud of someone whose success I tried to actively undermine. Whether you decide to help me or not, I want you to know that I'm truly sorry, not just for the legal problems I caused, but for the years I wasted trying to be someone else's flawed idea of successful, instead of learning what honest success actually means. Sincerely, Kenley. I folded the letter and handed it back to Dawn, thinking about redemption and second chances, about the fundamental difference between punishment and crucial education, about the strange ways that painful consequences could sometimes lead to genuine, lasting growth. What will you ultimately tell him? That he can formally apply for the program like every other candidate, that his past catastrophic mistakes won't automatically disqualify him, but they won't give him any kind of special consideration either, that if he's accepted, he'll start entirely at the bottom and work his way up based on demonstrable effort and genuine contribution, not history or prior connections. And if he succeeds, then he'll conclusively prove that people can change when they're finally ready to do the hard, necessary work. And if he fails, he'll merely prove that some people are more interested in appearing reformed than actually becoming truly reformed. As the afternoon wound down and the last of the graduation celebration was professionally cleaned up, Dawn and I walked through the property that had become our shared life's work. The Technical Institute was thriving. The small business incubator had helped launch 27 successful enterprises, and applications were coming in from rural communities across the South, wanting to replicate our sustainable model. Dawn, do you ever truly regret losing the Atlanta estates? Every single day, she said without hesitation. I deeply regret the embarrassment, the financial devastation, the public humiliation of failing so spectacularly at something everyone expected me to succeed at. But I absolutely do not regret learning what I learned. I don't regret discovering what I'm actually capable of building when I finally stopped trying to maintain what someone else had built for me. She gestured toward the institute, the workshops, the gardens where former students were growing fresh food for the local farmers market. At the workshop where current students were building furniture that would be sold to fund future expansion. I don't regret finding out that Mom loved me enough to let me completely fail at maintaining her superficial legacy so I could succeed at creating my own, solid one. As the sun set over the Oklahoma Delta, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise, I thought about Jacinda and her elaborate plan to save our daughter through controlled financial destruction. About the fundamental difference between gifts and education. About the precise mathematics of love that sometimes absolutely required losing everything someone thought they wanted in order to give them what they actually, profoundly needed. Dawn was correct. Some lessons were absolutely worth the price of 7 Atlanta estates to learn, and some inheritances were worth more than money, more than property, more than anything that could be calculated on a balance sheet. Dad, there's one more thing I need to tell you, Dawn said as we reached the porch where this whole painful, incredible journey had begun with a warehouse that everyone thought was worthless. What's that, sweetheart? Thank you for catching me when I fell, for helping me understand that Mom's real gift wasn't the Atlanta houses or even the warehouse. It was the crucial chance to become someone who actually deserved what she was really trying to give me. And what was she trying to truly give you? Dawn smiled, looking out at the community we'd built together, at the evidence of lives changed through honest work and genuine opportunity, the satisfaction of building something that matters, the security of knowing it's entirely sustainable, and the immense wisdom to understand that real wealth is not about what you inherit. It's about what you choose to ethically do with whatever chances you're given to conclusively prove who you really are. I squeezed my daughter's hand, feeling the calluses she'd earned through 2 years of physical work and community building, thinking about the woman she'd become when everything she'd thought she wanted had been stripped away. Your mother would be immensely proud, I said. I hope so, Dad. But, yes, I'm finally proud, too. Not of what I initially inherited, but of what I built after I lost absolutely everything, and found out what I was really functionally made of. Outside, the Oklahoma Delta stretched toward horizons that held nothing but possibility and sustainable hope, and I realized that some gifts were worth waiting a lifetime to receive. Pride doesn't come from what you simply inherit, daughter. It comes from what you build after everything falls spectacularly apart. And you choose to rebuild with your own hands, your own character, and your own ethical understanding of what actually profoundly matters. The end.